Hello, and welcome to the second professional development session for Peace Corps' Office of Innovation's virtual internship program. My name is Courtney Clark, and I manage the virtual humanitarian mapping program. I'm here with my colleagues. Our guest today is Gabriel Krieshok, who is Peace Corps' Information and Communication Technologies for Development Specialist. And we're also here with Kristen Moses, who manages the Success and Service internship program. So Gabe, if you want to take it away. Also, just a reminder to everyone watching, you can submit questions through that blue Q&A button or also through the Slack channels. We have those pulled up as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, the sort of mandate I got to speak up about today was to sort of talk a little bit about what my role is at the Peace Corps, doing this thing, this five-letter, I guess it's technically five-letter thing, ICT4D, if we count the number 4. And it's what?
As a letter.
As a letter. Well, 5-digit acronym. And what that means for the Peace Corps, and what that means to think about doing a technology-related thing while we're sitting here in like cubicle land in Washington, D.C. So how do we think about something at the global scale and think about our career, and I guess talk about my career a little bit as its trajectory has sort of gone, and you know, how I've ended up here, and then you know, what that means for you guys in terms of, you know, what you're thinking about, what you're passionate about, you know, how you want to think about service as it relates to your own life and what your, you know, future is going to be and everything like that. So please submit questions that'll help me sort of ground myself, because one of the challenges in doing any discussion like this is that I actually don't know who you guys are. Now, of course, I guess if you're watching this not live, that's just bully for you at that point. But for you live people, you have an opportunity here. Not that I'm necessarily wisdom, like sort of Confucius level wisdom that you wouldn't get anywhere else, but you know, maybe there's ways I can help you to make some of the same mistakes that I've made along the way, and that's got to be worth something. So without further ado, just I guess to give you a little bit of background about how I've ended up here. I grew up in Kansas, and I went to the University of Kansas, and I studied mathematics, and I dropped that after my 3rd year because turns out that mathematics is kind of hard, and I had no idea what I was going to do with it. And so after a little bit of soul searching, I actually decided to study abroad for a year, and I spent a year in France and Italy. And I know you guys are we all undergrads?
Most.
Most?
A few grad
90%?
students,
80%?
yeah.
Okay. Okay, so most of you guys doing undergrads, I imagine that if you were interested in the Peace Corps and you're watching this podcast, videocast, vlog, then you might have an interest in studying abroad and sort of learning about other cultures and other people and speaking other languages. So I can't sort of stress enough how wonderful that's been in my life. I know both of you guys studied abroad.
Yes.
Where do you guys study?
I was in Senegal.
Senegal.
Yeah.
That's a cool place to study abroad.
Yeah, it was great.
Oh, man.
During undergrad, I went to Denmark.
Oh, wow.
But then,
So cool.
Mexico for summer. And then Peace Corps, of course, I was in Georgia. The
Yeah.
country of Georgia, not the state.
Right.
That wouldn't be studying abroad, I guess.
No.
Although I had a friend who was from Canada who always said he was studying abroad in Kansas. So
Technically.
I guess technically it does count. So, and you know, that was really my first, so studying abroad in France, and I spent a semester doing a complete language immersion program where I lived with a host family, and I spoke only French. It was the sort of international language at this school, so I couldn't fall back and speak with other Americans in English, and we would be sort of severely admonished if we did, which was, I mean, they didn't hit us with rulers or anything. I'm not that old, but they would just frown at us, which at a very intense French school when your French instructors frowned at you, it actually meant something. I learned it quite well. I mean, I spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I really saw the value of it. I was not that good of a language student in the classroom, and sort of going there, forcing myself to be around it and being forced to interact in that language, it really uses a whole different part of your brain. And so I'm probably preaching to the choir on this, I know that, but so that was a really valuable thing. I thought, oh my gosh, there's so much here that I don't know about the world, and sort of just being there has really helped. Not only me in understanding it, but sort of me in understanding, my role to play and the sort of things that I was good at and wasn't good at, and what things I wanted to improve on. So anyway, that was sort of the first foray. Studied abroad. I finished out my degree actually changing it to cultural anthropology and French. And I decided to go back to France to teach English for a year, and then after that experience, which was a wonderful opportunity, and actually really was in many ways echoed what I would later go on to do in the Peace Corps, sort of similar experiences of really being out there. The study abroad was one thing because it was like you're in a city, you're with a bunch of other students, and it's like fun, but it's also like a lot of hard work. I think, after finishing college and doing the teaching English in France thing was, it was in a much smaller village, and it was like a job, and, I had to learn how to be like the youngest professional out of all these professionals, and, what that really meant for my future. It was really there that I started thinking about the Peace Corps and sort of doing that same experience of going abroad. And it was in I went to the Peace Corps in June of 2007, and I was sent to Madagascar to teach English as a foreign language. And when I arrived in Peace Corps, I loved teaching. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I mean, I was doing it in France, but and so I sort of got my feet wet there, but it was really rewarding, and it wasn't something I thought that I would enjoy that much. I thought it was just sort of going to be my excuse to get out there and to see the world, but it turned into this incredible practice for me and experience of sort of being at the front of the classroom, having to explain difficult concepts in simplified terms. It's one of these, like, you don't really understand something until you can teach it sort of moments that I had. Were you guys teachers? I don't remember now.
No, I did public health. Yeah.
Nope.
Lame.
Geo development.
Boring.
No scary children for us.
Yes.
Okay, well, I had scary teachers. Well, I was the scary teacher. I don't think. I wish I could talk to some of those students in English today, but I probably was such a terrible teacher that they'll never speak it again. But that's not true. They're fine.
But you brought technology into the classroom for them, right?
No, gosh, no. You're like, when do we get to the tech part? My God. This has been so boring. We're just going to spend an hour talking about teaching English. But, so to continue our narrative, this is like the Odyssey or something. So I spent about a year teaching, and then I spent a year focusing on a technology-related project. Now, I haven't talked about it yet, but I had always sort of done web design in my background, and that was actually my part-time job in college, and it's something that sort of just stayed with me, and I didn't think about it that much because, gosh, we're in the developing world, which you think about applying technology. So it wasn't sort of until I got to that environment, and for the first few months, I was in my little village. I was on the east coast of Madagascar. They actually got cell phone towers. If you remember, this is the summer of 2007. They got cell phone towers, and I was able to sort of see firsthand the role that technology was playing in these people's lives. Now, of course, like, it wasn't that. There was nothing backwards about the place. It was a great and progressive city, and it was very interesting, but they just simply hadn't had the infrastructure. I mean, it's Madagascar, for those of you who don't know, is an island off the east coast of Madagascar, off of Africa, the fourth largest island in the world, and up until very recently, it hasn't been connected to the rest of the world. Like in many places, you can go, if you Google like undersea fiber optic cables, you'll actually see these images of the world as it is today. And a lot of them will compare it to how it was even 15 years ago, and you'll see that there are all sorts of like these connections sort of crisscrossing the globe, these literal pipelines that are going on the ocean floors that are connecting continents and internet to people. You know, everyone thinks that that the internet is like it's done all by satellites, but the problem is the satellites are actually too slow. This is a huge tangent, but it's awesome to think about this because so many people don't know this. That it's something like 98% of internet traffic is done on these undersea fiber optic cables. So if you're watching this somewhere overseas, then you're likely watching it in that fashion. And we're probably like the cable is like being bit by a shark right now, which used to be a huge problem.
How did they solve that?
Well, it's because they were all in order to get the signal across before they were fiber optics. Even when they were fiber optics, it had so much magnetic coiling that it was the sort of electromagnetic field was large enough that it was like bothering the sharks, and they weren't sure exactly why it was happening. They would just find because they weren't like putting cameras on them, right. So they would just find that they would stop working. They'd have to send a ship out there. It's very expensive, and they'd send these hooks down, pull up the cable, and they'd find like the ends would be completely like tattered, and sometimes they would even find like wildlife like coiled up within the coil itself. So. But once they started using fiber optics for everything, and then the technology got better, got smaller, it became less of a problem. Okay. So now it's almost never a problem. Though they still do get cut from time to time, and then they have to go out and repair them. It's a pretty crazy process.
So is there one going to Madagascar now?
There are several going to Madagascar now. And so what happens with the phones is that they basically, they put up these big towers, and towers communicate via these big, like, circular sort of like microwave dishes, and they send signals back and forth, and then they'll I guess centrally convert that into like fiber optic signals, and that'll go across. So if you're trying to call like your family as a Peace Corps volunteer, it doesn't have to go up to a satellite and bounce back, which means there'll be like a 4-second delay, which is always a problem when I talk to my family. Because like if you've ever had a phone conversation where you're on a 4 or 5 second delay, it's maybe the most annoying thing ever. You get put that. Mm-hmm. And it ends up being like just these like you sound like Shakespeare and you're doing these monologues with each other. Yeah. Because you can't have this like real-time conversation. Nowadays, if I went back even in 2010, and when I would call back home to the U.S., there was like not zero delay, but almost zero, effectively zero. And this is how we can, Skype, things like that. Okay, so that's a total tangent, but being there firsthand, it allows you to see. In 2007, I was able to see, like, oh my gosh, this is really changing a lot. And I wonder what we can do, in the tech world to really meet the demand that's happening in these sort of very rural communities. And so I just got to be really interested in it at that time, and I worked on a project called MATA Projects, where we were trying to basically, as Peace Corps volunteers, piece together all the different activities, not just of Peace Corps volunteers, but of the international sector, put it on a website for us all to look at, and then sort of be able to leverage that for all the volunteers and all the tourists and all the people that were doing work for NGOs. Like, so here's a big bucket of resources for you guys. And so we built this out. We built it on a platform called MediaWiki, which is what Wikipedia uses. So it looked very much like a wiki. We were leveraging this because it was free and because it was pretty simple at that time. It's still pretty simple. And me and another guy were able to sort of figure out how to put the pieces together and make it work for us and the volunteers. And it was a lot of fun. It felt like being in a startup or something, because we were sort of managing the technology piece of it, but we were also working really hard on the training side of it so that we could get volunteers to contribute stuff to it. So it wasn't just about saying like, okay, here it is, good luck. We were really saying like, okay, we want this to work for you. What's going to make you want to put up information about your project on this platform so that others can find it? And then alternately, what do you want to find on this project? So people would tell us what they wanted, and they would say, I don't know how to use tech. These are other volunteers. They would say, I don't want to use a computer, but I've handwritten these 5 pages of notes. And so we would have another volunteer say, well, I'll transcribe those notes, I guess. So we would do that, and that's kind of how it worked for a long time, is that we were basically just transcribing each other's notes and pulling in like Word documents that people had written over the years, or PDFs, or whatever, and basically pulling this and putting it onto the site. And it got to the point where in less than a year we had something like, we'd gone from not existing to having something like 6,000 sort of articles on this platform. It was searchable and password protected, and parts of it were, not all of it. And so it was really a lot of fun to work on. It was sort of like a light bulb went off and said, like, this is something that could be really cool. From there, basically, I went back to graduate school. It was sort of me saying, I really don't know as much about this area as I would like to. I'm really fascinated by it. I have some real-world experience in it, but I want to know not just how to build a wiki, but I want to think about how we can use cell phones in the developing world, and what that's going to mean for people, and how to make services that are going to be usable. Not just, can I put a cell phone into someone's hand and have them make a phone call, but how can they learn about prices of agriculture around them, so that they can make sure they're not getting ripped off when they're selling something at the local market, right? So how do we do those sorts of things? And it wasn't immediately clear to me how to do that, and I was really just curious about where this fit in this whole academic spectrum, and I wanted to do more programming and computer programming, and I wanted to figure out how to do econometrics and program evaluation. So I decided I would try my hand at getting a master's degree, and gosh, it's getting really long. I want to make sure this is really, really exciting, so I want to make sure I'm not missing any random questions.
I mean, we do have some questions that were submitted before, if you want to get into any of those, or...
you know what, maybe we can listen to some of the questions, and I can talk into them as I'm telling the rest of the tale.
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel like Homer's Odyssey as I'm talking here.
Sure, okay.
We're in the siren phase of the Odyssey.
All right, so we have, for example, do you have any experience with innovative technology in improving access to education in developing nations, or along those lines, working with technology from a gendered approach? How do you think technology will be instituted within isolated areas to improve public health? So we've got technology in education, technology in gender, technology in public health. What kind of programs are trying to use technology to educate or distribute resources around improving sanitation and hygiene in developing countries? Do you know of any organizations that are working to help developing countries have improved access to technology and the internet? So those are all probably some pretty good starting points.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. This has been good. So it'll help me refocus on this stuff, because I'm getting to the interesting part. Is something you learn in any graduate program, or I needed the graduate program. A lot of people can probably realize it in the real world. Is that this is such a new field. And you wouldn't think that it is. You're saying, well, wait, we've had technology around forever. It goes back to the pencil. Let's start from there. Let's talk about the rise of the pencil and writing systems. But the reality is that thinking about this area of how to actually apply technology in a useful and usable way for end users has not been a consistent thread that we see through the rise of technological innovation around the world. And so, you think about the rise of the internet. The internet has not been around that long in the grand history, the grand scheme of things. You can think about 1992 as a pivotal moment for the internet, and you can think about the World Wide Web as even later than that, something like 96 or something. Might be messing that up exactly, but and computers only 20 years before that, and the personal computer 10 years before that. So and then we talk about the iPhone not even coming out until 2007. So this is recent stuff, and I think that there's sort of asking, oh, what has been, a lot of these questions are sort of like, what is the role of technology in this particular field? And, my first response is to say that it's probably not been figured out none of this has been figured out to a satisfactory extent at this point. There is so much territory that has yet to be explored. And there are so many things out there that haven't had the sort of critical lens of folks that are looking at it not just from the engineering side of it, but from the humanist side of it as well. So thinking about, not just can we get this cell phone to work, as I was saying, but how can we make sure that we're putting services on there that are going to be useful for people? How can we make this thing work for, my father or my grandmother? And, if it doesn't work for them, is that the fault of the technology? Is that the fault of the interface? Is that the fault of my grandmother? So, how do we think about those things? And so I love when I see resumes that are like, yeah, I've been doing mobile development for 15 years. And you're like, well, wait a minute, 15 years? So you were developing code for a Palm Pilot or my Casio Secret Sender Diary 9000, which I totally had and was an amazing piece of technology. I actually wrote a blog post about it. It's really cool. So that's sort of my big picture stuff, is that so much of this is so new that you could really probably piece together any two terms and realize that there's not been a lot that's done yet. And I'm saying that not to say that we're completely ignorant and naive about the world, but rather that there's so much need for people like you to come along and to help flesh these things out. That this is such a new field that people who are really interested in the intersection of technology and international development, there's just not that many people. There's not that many people that are good at the technology, who have this focus on the social good aspect, and there's not that many people who are really, concertedly thinking about sort of international development, but then what technology, how that can play a role in it as well. So, standing at that intersection, very necessary intersection to stand in. And so I guess that's been the luxury of my position here at Peace Corps, is because I've really had this opportunity to sort of stand at that intersection and to really help think about the role that we can play, the role that our volunteers who are out in the field for 2 years in these environments that are really focused on international development issues, that are in these environments where the volunteers are learning about their communities and their culture and the way that they eat and about the different relationships that people have. They are the ones who are learning what's going to work for a product or a service. They're the ones learning about, why a particular, new system of rice intensification is going to work in this one environment over here, and why it's not going to work in this one environment over here. And they can help sort of articulate that difference. Not that they're going to be able to articulate it any better than anyone else, but that's part of their role as a volunteer, is to volunteer their time and their insight in a way that somebody else can. So that's the big sort of picture of that stuff, I suppose. So to answer the first question around sort of what is the role that ICT for development can play in education. This is again, I sort of overwhelmed by all these questions, because each one of them is sort of their own subset of a field. And so if you really want to learn about ICT for education, I actually would suggest one, if not two, probably the main players in this field. The first one is an awesome expert by the name of Mike Trucano, Trucano. And he is over at the, I want to say he's, I'm going to screw this up. Is he at the World Bank? He might be at the World Bank. And he has this awesome blog around education technology and development. And he's probably one of the best thinkers on this stuff. Also, his blog titles are really good. He's a really good writer, and he talks a lot about different tools, different organizations. He's where? He's World Bank. Okay.
We can send out the links to his blog on Slack.
Yeah, awesome. And I might highlight a few posts. So definitely check him out to learn more about this field. I mean, the basic gist of what he says and what other folks say, especially when thinking about ICT for education. Sometimes they call it ICT4E if you're not confused enough already. Is that there are really no magic bullets in this space. So you might be familiar with a project like One Laptop per Child, which was Nicholas Negroponte's project, and it still is around. It's transitioned now. It's called the One Tablet per Child, and this is probably one of the first large-scale tech interventions at that personal level. So the idea was that they would make a really low-cost computer, laptop computer, and use sort of the bare minimum of things that they could, use a Linux operating system that they were going to custom develop, and basically distribute it out to school children and provide them with software that had things like a version of Wikipedia on it, and other like typing skill software, and like how to learn mathematics, how to learn foreign languages, stuff like that. So they put a lot of those packages together, put it out there, and made these large-scale, big investments with or countries and like ministries of education would make these large-scale investments in sort of procuring these One Laptop per Child laptops. And it's had a mixed record. I mean, it's been out there for 10 years. There's been a ton of research around it, and sort of you can look and see where people fall and whether or not they're supportive of it or not. But what's interesting is that I think the main takeaways from that were that people realized you can't just airdrop laptops into an environment and expect major education to occur. It's just not the way that it works. And any educator will tell you, duh. But that you need to really think about the teachers. You need to think about the system that you're doing education in, and the context and the environment. You need to think about sustainability. You need to think about where your students are at as well. So it's all well and good to procure a bunch of mobile phones for students, or to procure Kindles for them to read at night, but maybe they don't know how to use a mobile phone, or maybe they're not taking advantage of all the things, and maybe folks are just assuming that because they're younger than the teachers that they're going to have a better knowledge about how to use it, and that might not be true. On the same token, maybe are you preparing the kids, or the children, the students, to know how to protect themselves online, and how to make sure that they're not going to get defrauded or something like that, and protect them from cyberbullying and things like that. These are legitimate issues all across the board, and these certainly do not apply just to developing countries or places where Peace Corps volunteers live and work either. These apply all around the world. So that's kind of the main gist. I would definitely read Mike Trucano and anything that he writes. The other person I would read is actually a professor who's now at the University of Michigan, whose name is Kentaro Toyama. I'll send out a link as well. But he writes a lot about this issue, probably from a broader point of view, but he's probably done some really good write-ups on ICT for development in education specifically. And again, he's one of these sort of there is no magic bullet sort of people that, his main phrase is technology is an amplifier of human intent. So it's not that it's necessarily good, but it's also not necessarily bad. So we sort of shouldn't walk in either sort of like certitude, but that we really need to think about the fact that while technology has a role to play, it can also exacerbate existing inequalities and things like that. So just some good stuff to think about. Moving on to I guess I probably have more to say about the education side than the other stuff. Talking about sort of ICT for development and gender is another hugely important topic, and one that frankly is again one of these classic issues that really doesn't get covered enough. I would say if you want to look at ICT for development in gender specifically, there's a report that came out last year called I think it's called women in mobile women, connected women, something like that. I'll send out the link, but it's from GSMA. GSMA is the GSM GSM Association. GSM stands for something. It's the it's GSM is like the telephone protocol. I can't remember what it stands for. It won't help even if I tell you what it is. But the GSMA is the association, the sort of trade association, and they're huge. And they've got a complete unit that's devoted to thinking about, yeah, Connected Women 2015, and then women. No, they had another one too. But that's great. Okay, there's like mobile women as well. So Connected Women is more about. I think it's. I actually read these very recently, and I couldn't remember the difference between these two. But they're really great. Both of them are really great. But so they talk a lot about. They focus in specifically on sort of this gender dynamic. And you know, it's interesting. The gender dynamic is one of these classic areas that ICT4 development has a real role to play because, as I was sort of saying, you know, one thing you don't want to do is exacerbate existing inequalities. So, you know, if you're thinking about a society where, you know, it's more often that men will drive, or that men are the ones getting bank loans, or men are the ones in technical jobs and technical professions in STEM fields, you don't want to simply sort of just echo that and, you know, offer up resources and opportunities that are only going to be available to those communities or those organizations, sorry, those demographics that are already benefiting from them. So you also want to think about enlarging that sphere. So, you know, mobile phones, in particular, are another area that the distribution across genders is not equal. So I don't remember the statistics right now, and what it is globally. I think it's like 11% of a differential between men and women owning phones. That is to say that women own 11% fewer cell phones around the world than men. And you go in some places, particularly like Southeast Asia, and it ends up being 30 or 40%. So literally about for every you know 10 men that own a cell phone, you will find only 6 women that own cell phones. And there's a lot of reasons for that. You know, everything from sort of cultural legacies to sort of how people view you know, access to phones and who should have access. And they're really important questions. They're really important things to try and solve. And if you're trying to roll something out that's like a program of healthcare for women, then you need to make sure that women have access to all the same tools and technologies, or not the same, but they need to have access to those tools. So I would read that report. That's a really sort of good introduction to a lot of this stuff, and there's a ton of other stuff out there. As you know, you probably don't know this. So Peace Corps has a program where we're partnering with First Lady Michelle Obama in a program called Let Girls Learn, which is taking place in a number of countries around the world, where we're really focusing and targeting on how to keep women and girls, particularly girls, in school and allow them to finish their education, to complete it, and allow them to do it in a way that is going to be accessible, that is going to be inclusive, and that's going to be inspiring for them. So, you know, what are the ways in which Peace Corps volunteers can help promote that? So that's one thing that we're really thinking hard about right now is what are those things? You know, is it things like teaching girls how to do computer programming through programs like the Hour of Code? Is it things like promoting STEM fields in education so that you know, we're making sure that women and girls have all the opportunities and interests associated with STEM fields, and we're not just thinking about them, you know, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or now, you know, thinking about them as STEAM fields, so adding in the fine arts to the mix as well. Solve. You know, no one's cracked the nut on these yet. That's why there are these initiatives. So, you know, you can follow that program. You can follow things like the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. So you can see a lot of sort of different efforts and how the dialogue and the discussion is playing out around how to tackle some of these issues. Okay, so lastly, on the questions piece, before we get to maybe, I don't know, maybe there are other questions or not.
Yeah.
Are there?
I think so.
Okay.
We'll check it out.
to say the same thing or even less on the public health and hygiene fields. Again, I'll just repeat that it's an area where there's a ton of work going on. The public health field is interesting. I mean, if you're really interested in sort of the current state of the art, I would look at the examples most recently from the Ebola virus crisis and the response to it. So, because there's been some really interesting examples of where ICT for development was used and sort of leveraged sometimes to great success, sometimes to not as great success. You know, and I think it's a really good microcosm to see. So there's been a lot written about it. If you just sort of do a Google search, you'll be able to find some of the really interesting sort of articles about how, for example, the CDC was able to leverage a bunch of people really quickly. You can find different examples. You know, Courtney is really big into OpenStreetMap, so you can find examples of where they were actually, you know, mapping things using satellite imagery to map roads and things so that, you know, emergency healthcare workers could respond quickly to emergency situations. So, you know, that's some really awesome cutting edge stuff, and you know, it's also providing a lot of opportunities to learn. So we can see, you know, what we did well, what we could do better, especially from that public health point of view. Right now, you know, I would say look and see what's happening with every day as it unfolds with the Zika virus. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah, I think
Realizing
so.
that I'm pronouncing it out loud. Look at that. We're going to see some similar things happen. You're going to see a lot of leveraging ICT for development, both in terms of communications and outreach and sort of public awareness, but also in terms of things like logistics and getting organizations to work together and sharing information and data. And you'll see the fruits of people's labors around standardizing data sets and standardizing maps and things like that. And you'll also see some of the problems. So you don't necessarily have to be involved in you know, working for the CDC and going to Latin America or something like that to see this stuff. You're going to see a lot of it being played out online, on blogs, things like that. So I would definitely check out those things. Those are the ones that are top of mind. Finally, there was a question about organizations, and I mean, I think the answer is yes. There's just a ton of organizations doing this all across the spectrum. So you know, you can find everything from your, you know, just grassroots, one entrepreneur, you know, no formal education at all, but just doing some really interesting work, you know, across any field that you want that might be related to ICT for development, all the way up to, you know, the large multinational organizations doing huge global initiatives that involve, you know, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, going towards you know, various projects and programs around the world. So, you know, a good place to get started looking on this is it's going to be your search engine. I mean, I would say, you know, unfortunately, this field is getting so large that it's sort of like, you know, pointless to ask where is it, but rather where isn't it. But you know, there are obviously some organizations that have probably a more explicit focus and interesting focus than others. But
And I think you link to a lot of great stuff on the ICT4D like toolkit and those resources, so we can share that as well. And you can look through there, and Gabe links to sort of the best of the best.
yeah, well, maybe not the best of the best, but
Well,
I try
some
to.
pretty good
And if you
stuff.
guys know
Yeah.
about stuff too, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So this toolkit is an ongoing sort of project that I'm trying to put together, which is basically just, it's really meant for Peace Corps volunteers out in the field as sort of the primary audience. But I think it's one of these things that I would have loved to have had not only as a Peace Corps volunteer, but somebody studying this field. And it's sort of just, you know, there's a bunch of different sort of, it breaks it down into the sort of different program areas of what you can think about when you think about ICT for development. You know, whether you want to talk about digital literacy or mHealth, which is mobile health, or you want to talk about GIS and mapping, you want to talk about appropriate technology or design thinking or ICT in education. So it's sort of all there, and I sort of just tried to put together a bunch of links to different organizations, different databases that are doing work in these areas. So that's sort of the main gist of it.
Cool.
Those
We have
are the
one.
main
We have one more
questions.
question,
Okay.
going a little bit away from your international development hat, and I know you also know a lot about and are very interested in sort of technology in the government and the U.S. government, and there's such a wide range of agencies that do an amazing job of integrating new technologies, and then others that lag behind, to put it nicely. So that someone also had a question about, how do you envision, like, in the future, government programs being affected by technology and data? Do you have a favorite success story? What are your thoughts on what works well there?
We're thinking specifically about government, the sort of intersection of government and technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting area. It's one of these. I honestly didn't think I would come back to government after graduate school, and I did a couple of internships, or fellowships, one with the State Department and one with USAID, and I at the time I was really interested in it and thinking about, this is where the big show happens. I mean, the government, for all the bureaucratic wrangling and turf wars and sort of inefficiencies that are often associated with sort of the government sector, some of the most interesting stuff is happening here just as a function of its place, because this is, the thing. I mean, maybe it's easier for us to say that, for me to say that at the Peace Corps, because I think the Peace Corps is such an interesting organization. It's so interesting. I actually think it's fascinating that people don't realize sometimes that it is part of the U.S. government. I think that's a testament. It's unfortunate for the side of things like the branding of the government that it doesn't get to be associated, off the cuff with something like the Peace Corps. But it's also a testament to the Peace Corps about how non-traditional our role has really been in the government sector. That we have long been an organization that has been at the forefront of thinking differently and inventively about some of these things. Some of the challenges that are facing Americans and certainly the communities where Americans are serving with the Peace Corps, as an example. So I have when I sort of give talks internally about the work that I do, I have a slide where I have like a Venn diagram, and it's got 3 sort of meeting circles, and one is government, the other is technology, and the third is international development. And so I have like a little arrow pointing to that center, and it sort of says, this is where weird things happen, because it is a challenging role. So I have a tremendous empathy for people who work in the government and technology intersection, and even more empathy for those of us who work on the international development, government, and technology intersection. And why is it so tough is a really I think that was actually built into the question. I think bureaucracies are always going to be challenging on that front, and processes, organizations. This is probably a much longer conversation we could have about why some of these things don't work as well as we'd like them to sometimes. But I think the things that make organizations that have strong bureaucracies great is also make them very challenging. So you can imagine places that have bureaucracies that help move things along, and they help streamline processes and programs in a way that newer organizations like startup, for example, just simply doesn't have the bandwidth or the background to be able to do. So I think the sort of forward-looking part of that question, what we can do in the future, I'm incredibly excited and optimistic about the sort of meeting our ability as, especially people who consider themselves, public servants. I'm incredibly optimistic about our ability to work better in the future because of things that we're starting to see. So we're starting to see things, the dividends from standardized public data sets. I know that sounds totally boring, but you need look no further than the Ebola virus crisis. And these are not the things that are going to like win you, a top page, Medium article or something like this. But these are the really important and fascinating. Actually, probably will win you the top page of like a Medium post, right, but probably not like CNN.com or something. Okay, so I don't have to qualify that. But this is the fascinating stuff. Because our ability to like standardize these data sets and be able to talk to each other means that our ability to do our jobs and to save people's lives is improved, and that is exactly what we're trying to do. So I'm optimistic that we're starting to see those things. I think it's hard within the bureaucracies that we're in, with the organizations that we're in, with organizational culture sometimes, that where people are not always in sync about who the client is, what the outcome should be, and how best to sort of, posture ourselves to sort of meet those outcomes and then address the challenges that are in front of us as well. But there's no better time to be alive for it. I mean, you're laughing at that. I'm serious about it.
What?
Yeah.
We're not
Oh,
laughing.
I thought you were snickering.
No.
Oh, okay.
No,
I heard a
no.
snicker. Okay, that's a bad ear. Okay. My snicker ear. So, I don't know. Did I answer the question? I felt like I went off on a tangent, but it's a hard question to answer.
It is.
Like,
Do you have a
so
concrete
hard.
example to give
Of
of successful implementation of technology in a government agency?
I mean, what about
or one that you're really?
AT&F or the digital service? Those are exciting.
Yeah, so that's a really good example. So well, probably even. I'm like, I want to use hospital there. But
Or the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Love
yeah,
that.
I mean, you guys are naming great examples. Like, these are great examples. I'm just trying to think of one for us, but I can't do it.
I know.
No, so all of these things, definitely go look up all these things that we're talking about, that Courtney and Kristen are mentioning. So, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, 18F, the Digital Services Group. So, yeah, it doesn't matter what the hierarchies of these things are, but these are groups that are basically doing some really interesting things that are probably seeing more clearly into the future of some of this stuff than others, about being able to really leverage, data, information, systems, sort of open source and open platform approaches in ways that I think other government agencies are still lagging behind on. And they're doing it in ways that are more transparent, that are more sustainable, that are more stable, and they're more efficient and effective. So they're sort of like hitting everything on the head. The only thing that's different about them is literally that they're different. So that's the sort of thing you have to square. So all of those organizations in their own ways. So a really good example of something I love is the Digital Services Playbook. So that's sort of the spiritual grandfather, I guess, of my sort of ICT4D playbook that we'll link to. And sort of saying, here's a very simple and straightforward, way in which we approach these challenges around providing IT services in government. And so they've had listed out, in this playbook, very simple one-page thing, sort of, a checklist of things to think about, as well as, just like challenges you want to consider. So it's really good, really straightforward. That's an awesome thing, and it's helping a lot of agencies think through some of these really complex challenges. Yeah, so I think those are great examples. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Very good.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, those were the questions we had pre-submitted. Do any of our viewers have a question they want to ask?
684 viewers.
Wow.
Interesting. Wow.
Amazing. Gabe's actually a YouTube celebrity on the side. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, okay, I think we're all set with the questions and coming up on about an hour, but thank you so much. We really appreciate you speaking with us and the interns today. We'll be sure to get some of those links from Gabe and share them with you on Slack. And he also sits right next to us in the office, so if you have more questions, just let us know. Yeah.
Well, this has been fun. Thank you guys so much. And I want to say, I should have mentioned in the beginning, and I didn't, but thank you all, the interns here, our virtual interns, for helping out on all these projects, everything from success and service to the mapping projects. I mean, the reality is that we couldn't do the work that we do at the Peace Corps without so much support, and from people who are not only willing to give their time in this format, not just this talk, but the time you're giving to this internship, but to volunteering yourselves as public servants, as people who want to commit themselves to 2 years of public service. And even if the Peace Corps isn't exactly right, I mean, the fact that you're here really does say something pretty substantial, about your character, about building the world that you want to see, and doing so in a way that reflects, a spirit of giving and volunteerism. That's really important. So anyway, just to say thank you, once again on that stuff.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Gabe.
Thank you, guys.
And we'll be joining you again on Thursday at 1 o'clock, I
Mhm.
believe, Eastern Time, with another RPCV. Kate Glantz has started her own business.
Oh, she's so much more interesting than me. So
She
you guys
describes
go.
it as a wedding registry for charitable giving. So instead of collecting money and gifts when you're getting married, you ask your guests to donate to an NGO. All over the world, she's collected them, and so it's a pretty fascinating new idea, and she's obviously gone through a lot to set up this business, including the technical aspects of it. So please send us questions and tune in.
Yeah, she's amazing. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.